My name is Madison Claire Thompson. I'm 28 years old, and 3 years ago, my parents chose my sister's hypothetical future wedding over my actual one. They said I was selfish for not waiting my turn, that I was disrupting the natural order by getting married before my younger sister Jessica. What they didn't know was that their precious golden child had been secretly sabotaging my relationships for years, and their decision to skip my wedding would eventually expose a web of lies that would destroy everything they thought they knew about their perfect daughter and tear our family apart forever. Hey everyone. Before we dive into this absolutely wild family drama, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? If you're ready for a story about family betrayal, sweet revenge, and the ultimate justice served moment, smash that like button and subscribe, because this tale of sisterly sabotage will leave you speechless. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how karma finally caught up with my manipulative sister. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. Dad worked in finance, Mom was a real estate agent, and we lived in one of those colonial houses with the white picket fence that screamed American dream achieved. But behind closed doors, there was an invisible hierarchy that determined everything from who got praised at dinner to whose accomplishments were worthy of the family Christmas card. Jessica, my younger sister by 2 years, had been crowned the family princess from the moment she took her first breath. She was born with platinum blonde hair and bright blue eyes, a stark contrast to my mousy brown hair and hazel eyes that Mom always said made me look tired. Jessica was the one who got dance lessons, piano lessons, and art classes. I got hand-me-downs and lectures about being more like my sister. When Jessica won the school spelling bee in third grade, Dad took a half-day off work to celebrate with ice cream. When I made the honor roll consistently throughout middle school, I got a distracted "that's nice, honey" from Mom, who was busy helping Jessica with her science fair project, the one that would go on to win first place. Naturally, the pattern continued through high school. Jessica was homecoming queen, captain of the cheerleading squad, and dated the star quarterback. I was in debate club, worked part-time at the local bookstore, and had exactly two boyfriends, both relationships that mysteriously ended after Jessica befriended them and pointed out all my flaws in casual conversation. I remember the day I got accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship. I ran home bursting with excitement, ready to share the news. I found my parents in the kitchen, tears in their eyes as they hugged Jessica. She had just gotten accepted to the local community college, her backup plan after not getting into any of her first choices. Instead of celebrating my achievement, the conversation immediately shifted to how we could support Jessica through this difficult time, and how I should be more sensitive about flaunting my success. That night, Jessica came to my room with what I thought was an olive branch. "I'm really proud of you, Maddie," she said, using the nickname only she was allowed to call me. "Northwestern is perfect for you. You've always been the smart one in the family." At the time, I thought it was genuine. I didn't realize she was already planning how to use my absence to solidify her position as the family favorite. College became my escape. 4 hours away from home, I flourished. I joined the student government, made genuine friendships, and for the first time in my life felt valued for who I was, rather than criticized for who I wasn't. I studied communications and business, graduating magna cum laude, and landing a job at a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago right after graduation. Meanwhile, Jessica bounced between majors at community college, eventually dropping out to pursue what she called her artistic dreams, which mostly involved posting aesthetic photos on Instagram and dating a series of aspiring musicians and actors who were just as directionless as she was. But every time I came home for holidays or family gatherings, the narrative remained the same. Jessica was going through a creative phase and needed family support to find her path. I was the career-focused daughter who was too busy for family and putting work before what really mattered. The manipulation was so subtle, so consistent, that I almost believed it myself. Maybe I was selfish for moving away. Maybe I should have stayed closer to home. Maybe success in my career wasn't worth the growing distance I felt from my family. It wasn't until I met David during my second year in Chicago that I started to see my family dynamic clearly. David came from a family where achievements were celebrated regardless of birth order, where support wasn't a zero-sum game, and where love wasn't contingent on being the perfect child. David was a software engineer, kind, stable, and completely unimpressed by the kind of superficial charm that Jessica wielded like a weapon. He listened when I talked about my family, asked thoughtful questions, and gently pointed out patterns I had been too close to see. "It sounds like you've been apologizing for your success your whole life," he said one night as we walked along Lake Michigan. "Why do you think that is?" The question hit me like a physical blow because I realized he was right. I had been making myself smaller, dimming my light, and apologizing for taking up space since I was old enough to understand that Jessica's happiness seemed to require my invisibility. As our relationship deepened, I began to find my voice again. David encouraged me to set boundaries with my family, to stop funding Jessica's various business ventures with my savings, and to recognize that love shouldn't come with conditions and comparisons. When I introduced David to my family during Thanksgiving of my third year in Chicago, the reception was lukewarm at best. Dad barely looked up from his football game when David tried to engage him in conversation about investments and market trends, topics I knew Dad was passionate about. Mom was polite but distant, clearly more interested in hearing about Jessica's latest boyfriend, a wannabe influencer named Brad who spent dinner talking about his personal brand and asking if anyone wanted to see his latest TikTok. But it was Jessica's reaction that should have been my biggest red flag. She was overly friendly, almost flirtatious, asking David about his job, his hobbies, his thoughts on Chicago. She positioned herself next to him during family photos and found excuses to touch his arm when she laughed at his jokes. "Your sister seems nice," David said diplomatically as we drove back to Chicago the next day. "She's something," I replied, not sure why I felt so unsettled by their interaction. What I didn't know then was that Jessica had already begun her research. She found David's social media profiles, started following his friends, and began crafting her plan to destroy the best relationship I'd ever had, just like she had destroyed everything else that threatened to elevate me above my designated role as the family disappointment. 2 years later, David and I were stronger than ever. He had been promoted to senior developer at his company, and I had just landed my dream job as creative director at a boutique agency that specialized in campaigns for sustainable brands. We were talking about the future, marriage, kids, maybe buying a house in one of Chicago's charming neighborhoods. When David proposed on New Year's Eve 2021 with the Chicago skyline sparkling behind us and snow falling like confetti, I felt like my life was finally beginning. The ring was perfect. A vintage Art Deco setting with a diamond that caught the light like captured starlight. But more than the ring, it was the way David looked at me when he asked me to marry him like I was the most precious thing in his world. I called my parents the next morning, bursting with excitement. Mom's first words weren't congratulations. They were, well, this is going to complicate things. Complicate what I asked, my joy already starting to dim. "Jessica has been seeing someone seriously," Mom explained, with that careful tone she used when she was about to deliver news she knew I wouldn't like. "We've been expecting an engagement announcement any day now. She's been dropping hints about wanting a spring wedding." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, I found my voice. "Mom, I'm engaged. I just called to share happy news with you." "Of course, honey, and we're happy for you," she said, but I could hear the but coming from a mile away. "It's just that Jessica has always dreamed of being the first to get married. She's the one who's been planning her wedding since she was 5 years old. Maybe you could wait a little bit, give her a chance to have her moment." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Wait for what? She's not even engaged yet." Well, no, but Brad is planning to propose soon. They've been looking at rings. It would just be considerate if you could hold off on making any announcements or plans until after Jessica has her engagement party. That's when I realized that even my engagement, one of the most important moments of my life, was somehow supposed to revolve around Jessica's hypothetical timeline. David found me crying in our kitchen an hour later, still holding the phone. When I explained what had happened, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, anger, and finally a protective fury I'd never seen before. "Madison, you know that's completely insane, right?" he said, pulling me into his arms. "You can't put your life on hold because your sister might get engaged someday." "But what if I'm being selfish?" I whispered into his chest. "What if this ruins her plans?" David gently took my face in his hands and looked me directly in the eyes. "Listen to me. You are not responsible for managing your sister's emotions or timeline. You're 26 years old, you've been with me for 3 years, and we're ready to get married. The idea that you should wait for permission from your family is absurd." He was right, of course. But the programming of 26 years doesn't disappear overnight. I agreed to a longer engagement. Not because I wanted to wait, but because some part of me still hoped that if I was considerate enough, accommodating enough, my family might finally see me as worthy of their wholehearted support. For 6 months, David and I quietly planned our wedding for the following October. We chose a beautiful venue in downtown Chicago, a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with golden light. We kept the guest list small, about 80 people, mostly our friends from college and work, David's family, and of course my parents and Jessica. I was careful not to post anything on social media about the wedding planning. I didn't send save the dates to extended family. I kept our plans low-key, hoping that when Jessica finally got engaged, there would be plenty of space for her to have the elaborate celebration she wanted. Then Brad broke up with her in June. I found out through a tearful phone call from Mom. Apparently, Brad had decided he wasn't ready for commitment and wanted to explore his options, which, according to Jessica's detective work, meant he was already exploring his options with a two-year-old aspiring actress he'd met at a coffee shop. "She's devastated," Mom said. "Absolutely heartbroken. She really thought he was the one." I felt genuine sympathy for Jessica. Breakups were awful, and having your future plans implode was painful regardless of the circumstances. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do to help?" "Well," Mom said carefully, "she's been asking about your wedding plans. I think hearing about your happiness might be difficult for her right now." And there it was again. My joy was somehow an insult to Jessica's pain. "Mom, I can't cancel my wedding because Jessica got dumped," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I'm not asking you to cancel it," Mom replied quickly. "Just maybe postpone it. Give Jessica time to heal. She's been looking forward to planning a wedding for so long, and now she has to watch you have yours while she's dealing with heartbreak." I looked at David, who had been listening to my side of the conversation with increasing disbelief. He held up his hands in a gesture that clearly said, "Don't you dare." "Mom, we've already sent the invitations. We've paid deposits. Our friends have booked flights. I'm not postponing my wedding." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. When Mom finally spoke, her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "I suppose we'll have to see what we can do about attending then. Your father has a very busy work schedule in October, and Jessica might not be emotionally ready for a wedding celebration so soon after her heartbreak." The threat was crystal clear: choose Jessica's feelings over your own wedding or we won't be there. I had always known that Jessica was the favorite, but I had never imagined that my parents would actually skip my wedding to prove a point. The realization that they would rather hurt me than disappoint her was like a physical blow. "Fine," I said, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my cheeks. "Do what you think is best." I hung up and looked at David, who was already reaching for me. "They're not coming," I said simply. Then they don't deserve to be there, he replied, and I knew he meant it. We got married on October 15th, 2022, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and supported us. David's parents flew in from Oregon and treated me like the daughter they'd always wanted. My best friend Sarah walked me down the aisle. Our college friends gave speeches that made everyone cry laughing. It was the most beautiful day of my life, and my parents missed it because they couldn't bear to celebrate me if it meant Jessica might feel bad about herself. But what I didn't know then was that Jessica's heartbreak was about to reveal a truth that would change everything. I know this is getting intense, and we're just getting to the part where everything starts to unravel. If you're as shocked as I was by my family's behavior, you're not going to believe what happens next. The truth about Jessica is about to come out, and it's darker than anyone imagined. Before we continue with this wild ride, let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a family member who seemed perfect on the surface but was secretly sabotaging you? Hit that like button if you're ready for some serious ISA. Justice, because what's coming next will blow your mind. 3 weeks after my wedding, I received a friend request on Facebook from someone named Marcus Chen. I almost ignored it. I didn't recognize the name or profile picture, but something about his message made me pause. Hi, Madison. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think we need to talk about Jessica. I have some information you should know. Can we meet for coffee? My first instinct was to delete the message. It felt like the kind of thing Jessica would orchestrate to create drama. But David, ever the logical engineer, suggested we at least hear what Marcus had to say. If it's nothing, we've wasted an hour, he reasoned. If it's something important, we need to know. We met Marcus at a busy Starbucks in downtown Chicago on a rainy Thursday evening. He was about my age, well-dressed in a way that suggested he worked in corporate America, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked nervous as we sat down, fidgeting with his coffee cup before finally meeting my gaze. I'm not sure how to start this, he began, so I'm just going to be direct. I dated your sister for 8 months, ending about a year and a half ago. The relationship ended when I found out she was lying about, well, pretty much everything. I'm sorry, I said carefully, but I don't understand why you're telling me this. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through what looked like saved screenshots. Because she told me things about you. Specific things. And after seeing your wedding photos on social media, congratulations, by the way, you looked beautiful, I realized she was still lying. He turned his phone toward us, showing a text conversation between him and Jessica from March 2021. My stomach dropped as I read Jessica's words. My sister is going through a really rough patch with her boyfriend. She's been calling me crying every night because she thinks he's cheating on her. She's always been the dramatic one in our family, but this is getting out of hand. I'm worried she might do something desperate. I never called her crying about David, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We've never had those problems. Marcus nodded grimly. That's what I figured. She also told me that you had struggled with an eating disorder in college and that your parents were worried about your mental health. She said you were jealous of her relationship with me and that you had tried to sabotage other relationships she'd been in. Each lie hit me like a physical blow. I had never had an eating disorder. I had never tried to sabotage any of Jessica's relationships. If anything, I had bent over backward to be supportive of her choices, even when I thought her boyfriends were clearly wrong for her. Why are you telling me this? David asked, his voice tight, with barely controlled anger. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Because I found out she was doing the same thing to other people. After we broke up, I stayed friends with some of her college acquaintances on social media. One of them reached out to me last month, asking if I knew why Jessica had been telling people that her sister was a narcissist who had stolen her boyfriend in high school. My mouth fell open. I never stole anyone's boyfriend. I barely dated in high school. I know, Marcus said gently, because I did some digging. I found your high school's online newspaper archives. You were editor of the school paper, member of the debate team, and you graduated as salutatorian. Meanwhile, Jessica was suspended twice, once for cheating on a test and once for spreading rumors about another girl that turned out to be completely false. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. That can't be right. Jessica was homecoming queen. She was popular. Everyone loved her. Marcus pulled up another screenshot. This one from what appeared to be a group chat. This is from a conversation I found between Jessica and some of her friends from community college. Look at the date. The timestamp showed a conversation from 2 weeks before my wedding. Jessica had written, "My sister is making such a mistake with this wedding. The guy is obviously using her for her money and connections. I've tried to warn her, but she won't listen. My parents are so worried they can't even bring themselves to attend. It's going to be such a disaster. I don't have money or connections," I whispered. "And David makes more than I do." "That's when I realized what was happening," Marcus continued. "She wasn't just lying to me about you. She was lying to everyone about everything. And I think she's been doing it for years." David leaned forward, his jaw clenched. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "I think Jessica has been systematically destroying Madison's reputation with your family and friends for years. I think she's been lying about Madison's life, her relationships, her mental health, her character. Anything that would make your parents see Madison as the problem child and Jessica as the victim who needs protection." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too loud. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears as pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed began falling into place. Every time I brought a boyfriend home, Jessica would befriend them and then point out my flaws. Every time I achieved something, the conversation would somehow shift to Jessica's needs or problems. Every time my parents seemed disappointed in me, it was because Jessica had primed them to expect me to fail or disappoint them. "There's more," Marcus said quietly, and I wasn't sure I could handle more. He showed us another series of screenshots, these from Instagram DMs between Jessica and someone named Brad, artist, LA. The messages were flirtatious, sexual, and dated from 6 months before Jessica claimed they had started dating. "She was cheating on me with Brad for months before she broke up with me," Marcus explained. "But she told everyone that I had broken up with her because I wasn't ready for commitment. She played the victim so convincingly that I actually felt guilty for ending things." "Oh my God," I breathed, remembering how sympathetic I had felt when Jessica called crying about Brad's betrayal. The breakup with Brad. That was fake too. I saw him tagged in her photos last week. "They're still together, they're just keeping it secret for some reason." David spoke up, his voice deadly calm. "What reason?" Marcus looked at me with something like pity in his eyes. "I think she wanted your parents to skip your wedding. I think she wanted them to choose supporting her through her heartbreak over celebrating your marriage. And I think it worked." The room was spinning. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my place in it, about Jessica's nature, it was all a lie. Not just wrong, but deliberately constructed lies designed to keep me in my place as the family scapegoat, while Jessica maintained her position as the golden child who could do no wrong. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would she do this?" Marcus shrugged sadly. "I've been thinking about that for months. I think. I think she needs to be the center of attention. Not just liked or loved, but worshipped. And that's harder to do when you have a sister who's genuinely accomplished and kind and successful. So she decided to make you the villain in her story." I thought about all the years of feeling like I wasn't good enough, like I was selfish for wanting my achievements recognized, like I was asking for too much by expecting my parents to be proud of me. I thought about apologizing for my success, making myself smaller, dimming my light so that Jessica could shine brighter. And I thought about my parents missing my wedding, the most important day of my life, because they believed Jessica's lies about my character and David's intentions. The grief was overwhelming, but underneath it was something else. Something that felt dangerous and powerful and absolutely justified. Rage. Pure, crystalline rage at the years of manipulation, at the stolen moments of family pride, at the wedding day my parents missed because they had been so thoroughly deceived by their precious golden child. I have to go, I said, standing up abruptly. Madison, wait, Marcus called after me. There's something else you should know. I don't think Jessica is done. I think she's planning something bigger. I turned back to him and he must have seen something in my expression that made him take a step back. What do you mean? David asked. She's been asking my friends about wedding vendors in the Chicago area. Expensive ones. And she's been posting about wanting a fresh start and new beginnings on her social media. I think. I think she's going to announce her engagement to Brad soon. And I think she's going to want your parents to help pay for a wedding that's bigger and better than yours. The audacity was breathtaking. She had manipulated our parents into missing my wedding, and now she was planning to use that guilt to fund her own elaborate celebration. Thank you for telling me this, I said to Marcus, and I meant it. I owe you a debt I can never repay. As David and I walked back to our car in silence, I felt something shifting inside me. For 28 years, I had played by Jessica's rules. I had made myself smaller, quieter, less threatening. I had absorbed her lies and manipulation and tried to be the perfect, accommodating older sister who never caused problems. But Jessica had made one crucial mistake. She had gone too far. And now it was my turn to play the game. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The grief was still there, sharp and fresh, but it was overshadowed by something more powerful purpose. Jessica had spent years systematically destroying my reputation and my relationship with my family. Now it was time to document exactly what she had done, and more importantly, what she was still doing. David found me at the kitchen table with my laptop, a legal pad, and 3 cups of coffee at 6 a.m. How long have you been up? He asked, kissing the top of my head. Since 4, I replied, without looking up from my screen. I'm making a timeline. Every lie, every manipulation, every time she sabotaged something good in my life. Marcus was right. This has been going on for years, and I was too close to see the pattern. I had started with what I remembered from high school and worked forward, cross-referencing social media posts, old text messages, and family photos. The picture that emerged was damning. Junior year of high school, Jessica befriended my boyfriend Tommy and convinced him that I was too serious, and probably gay anyway because I wouldn't sleep with him after 3 weeks of dating. Tommy broke up with me the week before prom, leaving me dateless and humiliated. Senior year, Jessica told my parents that she'd heard from friends that I was drinking at parties and skipping classes. None of it was true. I was focused on college applications and maintaining my GPA, but it led to months of lectures and restrictions that made my final year of high school miserable. College Jessica would visit me at Northwestern and inevitably leave drama in her wake. She once told my roommate that I had talked about her behind her back, causing a rift in my friendship that took months to repair. Another time, she flirted aggressively with a guy I was dating, then told me he had come on to her and that I deserved someone more loyal. The pattern was always the same. Jessica would insert herself into my relationships and situations, plant seeds of doubt and discord, then position herself as either the victim or the concerned sister just trying to help. But it was the manipulation of my parents that was the most systematic and devastating. I found text messages from Jessica to our family group chat dating back 3 years. In them, she regularly shared concerns about my mental health, my relationships, and my priorities. She painted herself as worried and caring while subtly suggesting that I was selfish, unstable, and pulling away from family values. Madison seems really stressed about work lately. She snapped at me during our last phone call for no reason. I'm worried about Madison's relationship. David seems controlling. He doesn't want her to visit family as much. Madison forgot Mom's birthday again. I know she's busy with her career, but it really hurt Mom's feelings. None of these things had happened. I had never snapped at Jessica. David had never discouraged family visits. If anything, he pushed me to set boundaries because he could see how drained I was after every interaction. And I had never forgotten Mom's birthday. I had sent flowers and called, but Jessica had sent an expensive spa package that made my gift look thoughtless in comparison. Each lie was small enough to be believable, but together they created a narrative. Madison is selfish, Madison is unstable, Madison is pulling away from the family, Madison doesn't really care about us the way Jessica does. David read over my shoulder as I compiled the evidence, his anger growing with each revelation. "This is gaslighting on a massive scale," he said. "She's been systematically rewriting history to make you the villain and herself the victim." "And it worked," I replied bitterly. "My own parents believed her over me without question. But I was just getting started. If Marcus was right about Jessica planning to announce her engagement soon, I needed to move fast. I started reaching out to people from Jessica's past, carefully and tactfully under the guise of planning a surprise for her upcoming birthday. What I found was even worse than I had imagined. Sarah Martinez, Jessica's roommate from community college, told me that Jessica had been caught stealing from other students, not just money, but personal items that she would then claim to have found and return for praise and gratitude. When confronted, Jessica had convinced the residence hall staff that Sarah was the thief and that Jessica was being falsely accused out of jealousy. Trevor Wilson, one of Jessica's high school boyfriends, revealed that Jessica had cheated on him with 3 different guys, then convinced their entire friend group that Trevor was abusive and controlling when he tried to break up with her. It had taken years for Trevor to rebuild his reputation and friendships. Most damaging of all was my conversation with Ashley Chen, Marcus's younger sister, who had been in Jessica's year at our high school. Ashley told me that Jessica had been the one spreading rumors about the girl who got suspended. Rumors that were so vicious and persistent that the girl's family had eventually moved to a different district. Jessica was really good at making herself look innocent, Ashley explained over the phone. She would start rumors by saying she was worried about someone or concerned about their behavior. People thought she was being a good friend by sharing information, but looking back, she was the source of most of the drama in our class. The most chilling revelation came from Amy Rodriguez, who had been Jessica's college roommate before Sarah. Amy told me that Jessica kept a notebook where she tracked information about people, their insecurities, their secrets, their relationship problems. She called it her social insurance policy. She said everyone had something they didn't want other people to know, Amy explained. And if you had that information, you could protect yourself if people ever turned against you. I felt sick. Jessica hadn't just been casually manipulative. She had been strategic, calculating, and thorough in her efforts to control the narrative around herself and everyone in her orbit. But the most valuable information came from an unexpected source, Brad himself. I found his real Instagram account, not the artist persona he used publicly, and sent him a direct message pretending to be planning a surprise celebration for Jessica's birthday and wanting to coordinate with him. Brad's response was immediate and illuminating. "Oh, hey, yeah, Jess has been talking about wanting to do something big for her birthday. She's been hinting about announcements and celebrations. Between you and me, I think she wants me to propose soon, but I'm honestly not sure if I'm ready for that. She can be pretty intense about getting what she wants, you know." I screenshots the conversation, my hands shaking. So Marcus had been right. Jessica and Brad were still together, and Jessica was pushing for an engagement. The heartbreak that had caused my parents to miss my wedding was completely fabricated. Over the next 2 weeks, I compiled a comprehensive dossier on Jessica's lies and manipulations. I had screenshots, witness testimonies, timeline inconsistencies, and documented patterns of behavior going back nearly a decade. But I also did something else. I hired a private investigator. David thought I was going too far, but I needed to know everything. If I was going to expose Jessica, I couldn't leave any stone unturned. She was too good at manipulating situations and people. I needed evidence that was absolutely bulletproof. The PI, a former police detective named Linda Walsh, was thorough and discreet. Within a week, she had uncovered Jessica's complete social media presence, including accounts under fake names, her financial records, and her employment history. The results were staggering. Jessica had been fired from 3 different jobs for theft, lying to customers, and creating hostile work environments. She had taken out multiple credit cards using my parents' financial information as collateral, something they were completely unaware of. She was currently living off a combination of their financial support, money borrowed from friends, and income from selling items she claimed to have made herself, but had actually purchased wholesale online. Most importantly, Linda had found evidence that Jessica was indeed planning to announce her engagement on Christmas Day during our family's annual gathering. She had already contacted wedding planners, booked a venue for the following summer, and created a private Pinterest board with a wedding budget that exceeded $150,000. She was planning to ask my parents to fund her dream wedding as compensation for the trauma of having to deal with my selfish marriage announcement while she was going through her devastating breakup. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, and it would have worked perfectly if I hadn't learned the truth. But I had learned the truth, and now I had the evidence to prove it. The question was, what was I going to do with it? The old Madison would have confronted Jessica privately, given her a chance to explain, maybe even helped her get counseling. The old Madison would have tried to fix the family quietly behind the scenes without causing a scene. But the old Madison had spent my wedding day wondering why my parents didn't love me enough to show up. The new Madison had different plans entirely. Christmas was 6 weeks away. Jessica was planning to steal the spotlight once again to manipulate my parents into funding her fantasy wedding with money they had refused to contribute to my real one. But this time I was going to be ready for her. This time the truth was going to come out. And this time Jessica was going to learn that actions have consequences. Christmas morning at the Thompson house had always followed the same ritual. Mom would make her famous cinnamon rolls while Dad brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead. We'd exchange gifts in order of age. Dad first, then Mom, then me, then Jessica, and end with a big family dinner that showcased Mom's cooking skills to whatever boyfriends or friends had been invited to join us. This year felt different from the moment I walked through the front door. There was a tension in the air, an anticipation that seemed to vibrate through the house like a live wire. Mom hugged me a little too tightly, and Dad's smile seemed forced as he shook David's hand. "We're so glad you both could make it," Mom said, and I could hear the unspoken addition despite everything that happened with the wedding. Jessica arrived an hour later, with Brad in tow, looking radiant in a red cashmere sweater and designer jeans that I knew cost more than my monthly car payment. She hugged me enthusiastically, as if nothing had changed between us, as if my parents hadn't missed my wedding because of her lies. "Maddie, you look amazing. Marriage clearly agrees with you," she gushed, and I marveled at how genuine she sounded. If I hadn't spent the last 6 weeks documenting her deceptions, I might have believed her enthusiasm was real. Brad looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his phone and avoiding eye contact with everyone. I wondered if he knew what Jessica had planned for today, or if he was as much a pawn in her game as the rest of us. The morning proceeded normally. We opened presents, took photos, and made small talk about work and life and the weather. I had brought thoughtful gifts for everyone: a vintage watch for Dad, a first edition cookbook for Mom, a cashmere scarf for Jessica. They had gotten me a generic gift card to a department store and an awkward card that was signed "Love Mom and Dad" with no personal message. The contrast wasn't lost on David, who squeezed my hand supportively when he saw my face fall at the impersonal gesture. But I was patient. I knew what was coming, and I was ready. After lunch, as we sat around the living room with coffee and Mom's homemade pie, Jessica stood up with the kind of dramatic flair that had always commanded attention at family gatherings. I have something I want to share with everyone, she announced, her voice trembling with what appeared to be emotion. This year has been really difficult for me, as you all know. The breakup with someone I thought was the love of my life, it nearly broke me. I watched Brad's face, but he showed no reaction to being referred to as a past relationship. He just stared at his coffee cup like it held the secrets of the universe. But sometimes, Jessica continued, the universe has a way of bringing the right person into your life when you least expect it. She reached for Brad's hand and he looked up with what I was now certain was rehearsed surprise. Brad and I reconnected a few weeks ago, she said, and I had to admire the audacity of calling their continuous secret relationship a reconnection. And last night he asked me the most important question of my life. She held up her left hand, revealing a diamond ring that was noticeably larger than mine. Mom gasped and clapped her hands together in delight. Dad beamed like Jessica had just announced she'd won the Nobel Prize. "We're engaged." Jessica squealed, and suddenly the room erupted in congratulations and excitement. I watched the scene unfold with a strange sense of detachment. My parents were overjoyed, hugging Jessica and Brad, asking to see the ring up close, talking about wedding plans and timelines and how excited they were to finally have the wedding they'd always dreamed of. "This is so wonderful," Mom gushed. "We'll have to start planning right away. I've always wanted to help plan a daughter's wedding." The words hit me like a slap. Mom had never offered to help plan my wedding. She had been too busy supporting Jessica through her fake heartbreak to care about my actual celebration. "Actually," Jessica said, settling back into her chair with the satisfied smile of someone who had just played their ace, "Brad and I were hoping to have the wedding next summer. I know it's soon, but we've already looked at venues and the Ashford Estate has an opening in July that would be absolutely perfect." The Ashford Estate. I knew that name because I had looked at it for my own wedding before realizing it was completely out of our budget. The venue rental alone was $50,000, not including catering, flowers, photography, or any of the other expenses that would come with Jessica's dream wedding. Dad whistled low. "That's a beautiful venue." "Very prestigious." "It is," Jessica agreed, her eyes shining with excitement. "And I know it's expensive, but this is my one chance to have the wedding I've always dreamed of. I was hoping—" She paused, looking down at her hands in a gesture of vulnerability that I recognized as completely calculated. "I was hoping that my family might be able to help make it happen." There it was. The ask that this entire performance had been building toward. "Of course, sweetheart," Dad said immediately. "Whatever you need. This is important. We want to give you the wedding you deserve," Mom added, reaching over to squeeze Jessica's hand. "The one we always pictured for you." I felt David tense beside me. The implication was clear. Jessica deserved a dream wedding funded by our parents while I had deserved, what, their absence? This was my moment. I had been planning this confrontation for weeks, gathering evidence, preparing my words, steeling myself for what I knew would be the most difficult conversation of my life. But I also knew it was necessary. "That's interesting," I said quietly, and everyone turned to look at me. "Because I was under the impression that Brad had broken up with you in June and that you were devastated by the betrayal." Jessica's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Well, yes, we had some difficulties earlier in the year, but we worked through them. Love finds a way, right?" I said, pulling out my phone. "That's funny because I have screenshots of you and Brad's Instagram messages from 6 months before you claimed you started dating. Very romantic messages. Very intimate messages." The room went silent. Jessica's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "I don't know what you think you found, but I also have statements from 3 of your college friends who confirmed that you and Brad never broke up." I continued, my voice remaining calm and level. "In fact, according to Ashley Chen, you've been planning this engagement announcement for months." The fake breakup was specifically designed to make our parents feel so sorry for you that they would miss my wedding. Madison, what are you talking about? Mom asked, confusion evident in her voice. I stood up and walked to the mantel where our family photos were displayed in their usual arrangement. I picked up the most recent one, a picture from Jessica's college graduation that prominently featured her radiant smile. I'm talking about the fact that Jessica has been lying to this family for years, I said, turning to face them. Systematically, deliberately, and with the specific intention of making me look bad while making herself look like a victim. That's ridiculous, Jessica said, but her voice was shaking now. Madison, you're being paranoid, am I? I pulled out my phone again and began reading from my notes. Let's start with high school, shall we? Remember when you told Mom and Dad that you'd heard I was drinking at parties and skipping classes? I have my academic records from senior year. Perfect attendance, 4 gigapascals. Want to guess what your attendance record looked like? I watched my parents' faces as the information sank in. Dad was frowning, and Mom looked confused. Or how about college? I continued. Remember all those conversations where Jessica expressed concern about my mental health, my relationships, my priorities? I have screenshots of text messages from our family group chat. Dozens of them. All painting me as selfish, unstable, and pulling away from family values. I had printed out some of the most damning messages and I handed them to Dad. His frown deepened as he read. The problem is, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, none of it was true. I never snapped at Jessica during phone calls. David never tried to control my family relationships. I never forgot anyone's birthday. These were all lies designed to make you distrust me and depend on Jessica's version of events. Madison, that's enough, Jessica said, standing up. You're upset about some misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, I laughed, and there was no humor in it. Jessica, I have documentation of you being fired from 3 jobs for theft and creating hostile work environments. I have evidence that you've taken out credit cards using Mom and Dad's information without their knowledge. I have witness statements from former roommates, boyfriends, and friends detailing years of manipulation, lies, and deliberate sabotage. The silence in the room was deafening. Brad was staring at Jessica like he was seeing her for the first time. Mom had gone white as a sheet. Dad was still reading the printed text messages, his expression growing darker with each page. But most importantly, I said, pulling out my final piece of evidence, I have proof that the breakup that caused you to miss my wedding never happened. Jessica and Brad have been together continuously for over 2 years. The heartbreak, the devastation, the need for family support. It was all an act designed to make you choose her feelings over my wedding day. I handed Mom the printed screenshots of Brad's social media posts, the messages from Marcus, the testimony from friends who had seen them together throughout the time period when Jessica was supposedly heartbroken. You missed my wedding, I said, my voice breaking slightly despite my efforts to stay strong, because you believed that supporting Jessica through fake trauma was more important than celebrating the most important day of my life. The room erupted. Mom started crying, holding the evidence in her shaking hands. Dad's face had gone from confusion to understanding to fury in the span of minutes. Brad was backing toward the door like he wanted to escape, and Jessica was finally showing her true face. You vindictive bitch, she hissed at me, all pretense of sisterly affection gone. You couldn't stand that they loved me more, could you? You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to ruin the most important day of my life. The most important day of your life, I asked quietly. You mean like my wedding was supposed to be the most important day of mine, and then something beautiful happened? Dad stood up, his face, a mask of cold fury that I had never seen before, and looked directly at Jessica. Get out, he said quietly. Daddy, you don't understand, get out, he roared, and Jessica actually took a step backward. Get out of my house. Take your lies, take your manipulations, and get out. And take him with you. Jessica looked at Mom, her eyes wide with panic, but Mom was still staring at the evidence in her hands, tears streaming down her face. Mom, please, Jessica tried one more time. You can't believe this. Madison is lying. She's trying to turn you against me. Mom looked up at her youngest daughter, and for the first time in my life, I saw complete clarity in her eyes when she looked at Jessica. No, Mom said simply. You are. The aftermath of Christmas Day 2022 unfolded like a controlled demolition. Systematic, thorough, and irreversible. Jessica and Brad left that evening, after a screaming match in our driveway that had the neighbors peering through their curtains. She called me every name in the book, threatened to sue me for slander, and promised that I would regret this for the rest of my life. I felt nothing but relief. The weeks that followed were painful but necessary. My parents went through what I can only describe as a grieving process, mourning not just the daughter they thought they knew, but the years of damage their favoritism had caused to our family. Dad spent hours going through financial records with a forensic accountant documenting the extent of Jessica's fraud. She had stolen nearly $30,000 from them through unauthorized credit cards and forged checks. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Jessica was charged with identity theft, fraud, and forgery. More importantly, my parents began the hard work of rebuilding their relationship with me. We failed you, Mom said during one of our long, tearful conversations in January. We failed you as parents, and we can't undo that. But we want to try to make it right. The apology felt good, but the actions that followed meant more. Dad removed Jessica from their will and insurance policies. Mom started therapy to understand how she had been so thoroughly manipulated. They both began making an effort to understand my life, my marriage, and the person I had become despite their neglect. Most satisfying of all was watching Jessica's carefully constructed world crumble around her. Brad broke up with her the day after Christmas, posting a lengthy Instagram story about discovering who someone really is and being grateful for dodging a bullet. The engagement ring went back to the jewelry store. Jessica's friends began distancing themselves as word spread about her lies and manipulation. The community college where she had been taking random classes asked her to leave after several professors reported suspicious behavior and plagiarism. She moved back in with my parents for exactly 3 days before Dad told her she had 48 hours to find somewhere else to live. She couldn't afford her own apartment without their financial support, which they had cut off entirely, pending restitution for the money she had stolen. But perhaps the most poetic justice came from an unexpected source. In March, I received a call from Marcus Chen. He had stayed in touch after our initial meeting, providing additional evidence for the legal case against Jessica. But this call was different. I thought you should know, he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Jessica is working at a fast food restaurant in the strip mall near your parents' house. She tried to add me on social media last week, probably hoping I hadn't heard about what happened. I declined the request, but not before I saw her profile. No more designer clothes, no more expensive dinners, no more lifestyle posts. She's living in a studio apartment and driving a 15-year-old Honda. The image of Jessica, who had once refused to be seen in anything that wasn't a brand name, wearing a uniform and asking, "Would you like to make that a meal?" was more satisfying than any revenge I could have planned. David and I used the chaos of the holiday season to quietly plan something special. In February, we held a small wedding celebration, the one we should have had originally. My parents were there, tears in their eyes as they watched their daughter marry a man who genuinely loved and supported her. David's parents flew in again, and our friends surrounded us with the kind of joy and celebration that makes a wedding memorable. This time, there was no drama, no manipulation, no family member trying to steal the spotlight. Just love, support, and genuine happiness. My parents paid for the entire celebration without being asked, and Dad gave a speech that had everyone in tears. I missed my daughter's wedding because I was fooled by lies, he said, his voice strong despite his emotions. I can't get that day back, but I can make sure that Madison knows now and forever how proud I am of the woman she's become and how grateful I am for the man she chose to marry. Later that spring, Jessica made one final attempt at manipulation. She showed up at my office building, tearful and remorseful, claiming she wanted to make amends and rebuild our relationship. But I had learned my lesson about Jessica's tears and apologies. I forgive you, I told her, because carrying anger was only hurting me. But I don't trust you, and I don't want you in my life. That's not punishment. It's protection. She tried to argue to convince me that she had changed, that family should forgive family, that she was getting therapy and working on herself. But I had heard it all before in different forms throughout our childhood. I walked away and never looked back. Today, 3 years later, my life looks nothing like it did before Christmas 2022. My relationship with my parents isn't perfect. We're still working through years of damage. But it's real and honest in a way it never was before. They know me now, not the distorted version Jessica had created in their minds. David and I bought a house in a quiet neighborhood outside Chicago. We're talking about starting a family, and for the first time, I'm not worried about how my choices might affect someone else's feelings or timeline. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that Jessica is still in town, still working service jobs, still struggling to maintain the lifestyle she once took for granted. She's burned through several attempts at rebuilding her social circle, with people inevitably discovering her patterns of lies and manipulation. Sometimes I feel sorry for her. It must be exhausting to live in a world where you have to constantly manufacture drama and crisis to feel important. But mostly, I feel grateful that I'm no longer part of that world. The most unexpected gift that came from all of this was the relationship I built with Marcus Chen and his family. What started as him reaching out to warn me about Jessica's lies turned into genuine friendship. Marcus and his wife have become some of our closest friends, and their kids call us aunt and uncle. It's funny how sometimes the worst experiences in our lives lead us to the best people. My parents and I now have monthly dinners where we actually talk. About work, about dreams, about the future we're building together. Mom asks about my marketing campaigns, and Dad wants to hear about David's latest coding projects. They're learning who I really am, not the version of me that Jessica had painted in their minds. Last month, on what would have been Jessica's 27th birthday, I received a text from an unknown number. It was her reaching out with what appeared to be another attempt at reconciliation. "I miss our family," she wrote. "I miss you. Can we please talk?" I showed David the message, and he asked what I wanted to do. Nothing, I said, and I meant it. I'm done responding to her timeline, her needs, her attempts to control the narrative. My life isn't about her anymore. I deleted the message without responding and took David out for dinner to celebrate another day of living authentically surrounded by people who love me for who I actually am. The truth really can set you free, but sometimes you have to fight for it. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose everything you thought you wanted in order to gain everything you actually need. Jessica taught me a lot about manipulation, gaslighting, and the lengths some people will go to maintain control over others. But more importantly, she taught me about my own strength, my own worth, and my own right to exist without constantly apologizing for taking up space. The golden child facade finally cracked, and underneath was exactly what I suspected all along. Someone so terrified of not being the center of attention that she was willing to destroy her own family to maintain her position at the state, top of the hierarchy. But here's the thing about golden children, who achieve their status through manipulation rather than merit. Eventually, the gold plating wears off, and everyone can see what's really underneath. So that's my story of family betrayal, manipulation, and ultimately justice served. It took 28 years for me to see Jessica's true nature, and it took a stranger reaching out to me for the whole truth to finally come to light. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones we trust most, and sometimes the only way to heal is to stop making excuses for their behavior. I want to know, have you ever dealt with a family member who seemed perfect on the surface but was secretly sabotaging you? Have you had to make the difficult choice between keeping peace and protecting yourself? Share your stories in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences is the most healing thing of all. What would you have done in my situation? Do you think I was too harsh, or should I have exposed Jessica's lies sooner? Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member, and how did you handle the guilt and aftermath? I read every comment, and I'm genuinely curious about your experiences with family dynamics like this. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family drama, relationships, and finding the courage to stand up for yourself. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries with family members even when it's difficult. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their toxic behavior. Thank you for listening to my story and for all the support you've shown. Remember, you deserve relationships built on truth, respect, and genuine love. Don't settle for anything less, no matter how complicated the family dynamics might be. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to participate in someone's destructive patterns, even when that someone is family. The most important lesson I learned from all of this: your worth isn't determined by how well you can make other people comfortable with your existence. You don't have to shrink yourself to make room for someone else's ego, and you absolutely don't have to sacrifice your own happiness to maintain someone else's lies. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and remember that chosen family can be just as meaningful as blood family, sometimes more so. I'll see you in the next video with another story that proves karma really does come full circle.